All right, welcome back, everyone. So, like I said, tonight we're talking about language of invitation. Just gonna get my slides up here. Can we see this? Yeah? Tam, you're the only one I can see. All right, great. So, language of invitation is something that just takes a while to grasp. I think it's kind of like way of the guide. It's okay that this might be a little confusing at first, and we're going to be working on this a lot in the next several months. This is actually something, this is a part of the course you're going to get probably more feedback on than any other part of the course because you're going to be submitting invitations and we're going to try to provide you with feedback that, if you will welcome it, can get into some of the minutia of how words can impact people's experience. And before we start, just a couple announcements. So number one, if you have not signed up for one of the co-guiding walks, Tam, maybe you can throw that link in the chat. Again, this is not compulsory, but it's a great opportunity for practice. So I would encourage you to try to make one of those if you can. Number two, just a reminder, when we get to module 7, that is when you will be able to start guiding walks, but you will only be able to start guiding walks if you have finished the assignments in modules 2 through 6. So we're now in module 5. So this is a good time if you're feeling a little behind to just go ahead and turn those assignments in. I'll remind you, these are not graded. They don't need to be perfect. A lot of these assignments are really like living documents. Like, you're going to make your pop, but that's not the end of you making your pop. It's just going to keep evolving. So don't worry about it being perfect. And then lastly, some scheduling reminders. So first, you have your WFA. This is something that just, it takes a fair amount of time. You can either do it in person as a 2-day weekend event, it's 8 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday, or you can do it remotely, online. And with that, you can kind of break it into small pieces, however small you want. You can do just 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks or whatever it is, but it does take some time. So I'll just encourage you to find some scheduling time to fit that into your life, whether you're doing it in person or online. Your solo wander, I believe this gets dripped in module 9, but for now, all you need to know is that later in the course, we'll be inviting you to go on a minimum 3-hour solo wander. I personally think it's nice if you can carve out some more time than 3 hours. If you can spend the whole day out there, some people like to do sunrise to sundown. That's a lot. But if you can schedule a day where basically that is your only thing you're doing all day, that's going to really support you in having a good experience. I find that the only reason why people have a really challenging experience with that is that they try to schedule things around it. So it's like, okay, I'm going to, go to work in the morning, and then I have a 3-hour block of time. I'm going to do my solo wander, and then I have to go to a birthday party in the evening. Basically, the coming in and out of that depth of liminality is just really challenging. So if you can find a day somewhere around module 9, just mark it in your calendar. Say this day it's a gift to myself. I love solo wanders. I try to do them 2 or 3 times a year. And the only way it seems to work is if I pick a day and say, there's nothing I'm doing that day except for this. And then we discussed this a little bit last time about your guided walks. So again, just picking some days when you have time to guided walk. And you don't have to worry about recruiting people just yet. The first step is just finding a time that is going to work for you. Tam, any other announcements or additional pieces on any of that?
Not at this time.
All right, awesome. So we come back to the core motto. The forest is the therapist, and the guide opens the doors. And what do we mean by doors, and how do we open them? One important way is through our language. So the doors you might consider to be the senses. We're helping people open these sensory pathways of connection between the experience of their living body and the experience of the more than human world. So we're trying to help them orient towards embodiment and away from thought. This, I think, is something that a lot of people taking this course really struggle with because we're so used to giving people experiences that are like mind-blowing. It's like, oh, blow people's minds. And really, this isn't about the mind. It's really about the body. And for that reason, invitations are actually extremely simple practices. And that makes a lot of people a little bit anxious. They feel like, this is so crazy that this is so simple. How, are people going to take me seriously? Last night, one of my partnership invitations was essentially just about touching trees in the dark. It was a full moon walk, so I gave everyone a little tea light, and I said, just wander up to these trees and just place your hands on them. Find a way to touch them with your body and spend some time there. And, it was really fascinating. After the walk, people were saying stuff like, through that invitation, I started realizing that trees probably don't get a lot of hugs from people and that we kind of objectify them with the visual sense. We see their beauty visually, but we very rarely have a physical touch connection with them. And all these pieces, and I didn't say think about this, think about that. The thoughts can come up. It's okay that people have thoughts, emotions, movements, sensations, images, but we're not creating movement, thought, image, sensation. That's what the forest is doing. So we're getting people into this relationship, and then the forest is giving them a unique experience. So we're really here to help them get into their bodies, relax their minds, and then the forest can become the therapist. In this way, language of invitation is sort of the enactment of the way of the guide philosophy. If you think of way of the guide as the philosophy we're teaching you, language of invitation is really the technique. One thing that I find helps me is a Zen capping phrase that says, mind empty, heart open. So we can't open people's hearts. It's a reflexive reaction to the emptying of the mind. So last call, we talked about standard sequence. We talked about the threshold of connection, liminality, and the threshold of incorporation. For tonight's talk, we're really going to be focusing on these partnership invitations that the guide offers during that middle liminal section. This does not mean that language of invitation does not apply to pop, whim, and tea ceremony. But for tonight's call, we're really focused on this middle section. So partnership invitations come in two flavors. The first are the works everywhere and anywhere type. And the second are site or being specific invitations. Now, just to be transparent, when we are guiding you remotely, we can only use the first type of partnership invitation because we're not all in the same place. So I cannot assume that you all have access to, let's say, oak trees or boulders or a creek. Working in partnership with those beings specifically, we can only do when we are guiding in person. That being said, the works everywhere and anywhere type of invitation are not only useful for remotely guided walks, but they're also really wonderful to have in your backpack of invitations. Because if you, let's say you get a job, they say, we want you to guide, in our backyard or in our local forest, and you've never scouted and you've never been there and you don't know what beings are there. The works everywhere and anywhere type, you don't need to scout. You know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to do intro, pop, whim, these anywhere, everywhere types, and then threshold of incorporation. So let's take a look at some works everywhere and anywhere type. For example, sit spot. Go find a place your body wants to sit and simply rest there, noticing whatever your senses might pick up over the next 20 minutes. I know that no matter where you are, this will work, right? It does not require specific access to any phenomenon or being. Likewise, texture gathering. Wander out and explore this place with your hands, noticing how beings feel against your skin. Collect a few and bring them back to this circle when you hear the coyote call. So again, no matter what beings are around, they all have texture. This is going to work anywhere and everywhere. Heart compass. Close your eyes and place your hands over your heart, then slowly turn your body in a circle. When you feel your heart pulled in a certain direction, open your eyes and wander out to encounter whatever has called your heart towards it. Repeat this process as many times as you wish. So as a guide, I know that these are going to work anywhere. They are invitations with incredible versatility. And the reason that they have this quality is because they're very broad and open. They're relying on senses without any specificity in terms of the beings that we are working with, okay? So now we'll look at some sight or being specific invitations. And you will not have experienced any of these on remote walks because, like I told you, we can't really give you these because we don't know what you have access to. So sand scrub. Lay down in this sand and give the earth a massage, perhaps with your hands or even your entire body. Simply notice all the ways that your skin can experience this sand. Water orchestra. Find a place to sit by the creek and see how many sounds you can make in partnership with these waters. Notice each sound as it arises and fades. Bird call and response. Wander in this forest and listen for the calls of the birds. Each time you hear one, offer a sound back, perhaps a tone or a song or a whisper. Allow your body to become your voice. So these invitations work in partnership with specific beings, right? The sand, the creek, and the birds. But we can work in partnership with any being, really any phenomenon that we are experiencing in the field. So when we get to this thing about catching and crafting invitations, the first step is really just picking a being to work in partnership with. Say, well, what do we got here? That's usually what I ask myself during What's in Motion. If I'm going to kind of try to catch and craft an invitation spontaneously while people are doing What's in Motion, I just look around and say, who's here? What beings are here that are calling out to be worked with in partnership? And then how do I create an invitation that introduces people to this being or this phenomenon through their senses? So this is part of the wonderful thing about kind of deepening your relationship with your own bioregion, that as you get to know the beings that you're living with, you'll start to just catch these invitations. Tam, before I move on, anything you want to add, any of this?
No, but there's just a question in the chat that says, is rain or snow other experience count as a being for an invitation? And I want to say rain or snow and other elements count as being, like we are considering them beings. A being could be a tree, a rock, the wind, clouds, rain, snow, etc.
Absolutely. Any being that you can have a physical sensory relationship with is totally on the table, right? I guess where we draw the line are beings that you cannot have a physical sensory relationship with. So even though, let's say, mitochondria are technically, real physical beings, we cannot have a sensory physical experience with them. But yes, anything material that we can have this sensory experience with, then yes, all of that is on the table. So partnership invitations have 4 core qualities to them. You can remember this by the acronym SOCI. I like saucy personally. They are simple, open, sensory, and infinite. I like to think of this as these are things that the participant is asking of me as the guide. So simple just means help me relax. This should be easy. If you give an invitation and people have to think about how to do it, then it's probably too complicated because we don't want people thinking about anything. So if you give people too much, or you give them something that is kind of a lot of steps, sometimes the invitations can look like, all right, find a place by the creek, and then I want you to take some breaths, and then I want you to look at the water, and then I want you to touch the water, and then I want you to hold it, and then I want you to carry the water to a tree, and then I want you to look at the tree, and then I want you to listen to the tree, and then I want you to put the water down, and then I want you to walk back to the creek. All of a sudden, this becomes hard to remember everything. So the simplicity is both in that it's not a lot of steps, but also that the steps themselves are not something you have to figure out how to do. It just should intuitively be easy, should be simple. And like I said at the top of the call, the simplicity can be very intimidating for new guides because they feel like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, how can this work, it being so simple? And I think this is really part of the magic of this practice, that basically the average person doesn't have access to being this simple. We have kind of an overcomplicated psychology that wants to figure everything out. And so the invitation to just smell the trees can bring up a lot of things for people that are locked inside the body. Again, this is a somatic practice. We're not trying to blow people's minds. We're trying to get them into their bodies. And then there's a lot of wisdom and intelligence that can surface just through these sensory experiences. Okay, the second quality is open. And I think of this as the participant saying, just accept me as I am. Don't try to heal me or change me or fix me. So the quality of openness is that it is not coercing people to have a particular emotional or cognitive or spiritual experience. We're not approaching this in a way of saying, this is going to help you, this is going to heal you or change you or transform you. Openness means that there's 10,000 possibilities for what can come out of this, that we have not predetermined what we want people to think, feel, or perceive as a result of this invitation. The third is sensory. I think of as people just saying, help keep me in my body. This should be a grounded experience of being in the body. And lastly, this quality of infinity, which is like them saying, allow me to linger in this experience. Let me get lost here. Let this be a space of timelessness. So part of this thing about infinity is that the invitations do not have a terminal point. They don't have a way that you can kind of finish the invitation. I think I was telling a small group about this thing. In game theory, there are infinite games and finite games. So a finite game is a game where the point of playing is to determine a winner and a loser. And an infinite game, the point of playing is to collaboratively figure out how to continue playing the game. So relationships all happen to be infinite games. You can't win them. That'd be cool if you could win a relationship, but I don't think it's possible. So invitations as bridges or pathways into relationship are also infinite games. It's not like, go be with the tree until you hear the tree tell you something. Go collect stones until, your hands are full. We don't want people going out with an objective mindset where they're trying to achieve the terminal point of the invitation. We want the invitation to essentially be replicable in infinity. So you remember that invitation, let's see, I think it was Yeah, so in Heart Compass, there's this part at the end where it says, repeat this process as many times as you wish. That's one strategic way of employing the language of invitations to create infinity. That you don't say, tune into your heart sense, wander. When you find that being, it's over. No, say, okay, after you found that being, repeat this process as many times as you want. That's just one way of doing it. But that's an example of how to create this sense of infinity within the invitation. All right, now we're going to do something interactive. So this is not an invitation that I would use on a forest therapy walk, but this is an exercise that is going to help us learn about language of invitation. So allow your hands to become a cup, wander for 5 minutes, bring something back. Any questions? All right, I'll see you in 5 minutes. So coming on back with our hand cups. Now, if you could please use the chat box to tell us what you brought back. And Tam, maybe you can reflect these comments into the space.
A clementine. Nothing, because I felt stressed. Heat. Yellow pathos leaf from dead heading. My stacking stones. Air. A letter to my cousin. Totoro. I have a small tea tin with cappuccino seeds inside. With cappuccino seeds inside. Went to get the mail, and I'm always annoyed by the chips that spill over from the yard. So, a wood chip. A citrine crystal. A water bottle. A beetle in resin that was a gift many years ago. A little painted horse. Flowers. A bowl with acorns and pine cones that I picked up during a remote therapy walk in January. A book I gave my aunt. Opal ring from mom. Thirsty maple leaf and smell of beautyberry and scratches.
Sweet. Tam, did you bring back anything?
Yes, a book of matches.
Oh. I have joy. So you can see from the diversity of things that people brought back that this was a very open invitation. It allowed for a full range of expression by not creating any constraints on what or how you were doing the invitation. Now, I want to make one comment on something before I go into this next slide, which is that Elizabeth said she brought back nothing because she felt stressed. Now, I was telling this to, I think, a small group last week that it's nice if you can make your invitation a game that cannot be lost ever. And so oftentimes when I do some sort of gathering invitation, I'll say something at the end like, if at the end of 10 minutes you find that your hands are empty, allow that emptiness to be the being that you are bringing back. And so now, no matter what your process is, I've effectively made it impossible for you to fail. Now, in Elizabeth's case, nothing is also a being. We might just call that emptiness. All right, so okay, so how can one word have a big impact? So let's say I added an adjective here. Say I said, take a cup, wander for 5 minutes, bring back something beautiful, or bring back something miraculous, or bring back something special, or bring back something ugly. Would anyone like to unmute and just share? How would that have changed the experience for you?
Judgy and prescriptive.
Perfect. Thank you, Julia. Anyone else?
It creates expectations.
Ah, yes. Thank you, Sky. Anyone else?
I'd be self-judging because it's beauty's relative.
Oh, yes. Now there's this anxiety about, well, is it beautiful or do I think it's beautiful? And then I'm going to bring this back and everyone's going to think that this is ugly. Right? Yeah, so effectively just adding this one word really closes the realm of possibilities and it creates this tension in the field. Because now there's an assignment that has some quality of reflecting your own opinion and bias that you're going to essentially reveal to the group. So now it's like this self-conscious assignment. It's like homework, right? It's like, uh-oh, I have to find something beautiful. So then you're running around looking for something beautiful. So now there's an achievement or an objective that we've created for people that really obscures the ability for the forest to operate on all levels, right? When people wander and they find what they find, it becomes reflected back to them through a prism of their own experience, right? They say, oh, that's interesting. This is the thing. This is the thing that landed in my hands. Huh. There's a quality of mystery to it because we're not trying to satisfy an objective. We're just allowing whatever is showing up to become the being that rests in the hands. Okay. What about if we added an adverb? This is a word that describes how you do an action. So what about if I said, take a cup, wander contemplatively for 5 minutes, bring something back, or wander joyfully for 5 minutes, bring something back. How does this alter the experience?
I'd be like in my head instead of in my body
Why?
because I'd be focused on doing it right.
Right.
My initial impression too is like if someone was like, go wander joyfully, I was like, don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Why am I not already joyful?
Right. Am I not walking joyfully enough for you? Yeah. Some of you like may have, what is it, pathological demand avoidance. If someone tells me to do something, I'll be like, no, I'm not doing that. But yeah, this essentially creates the container for a performance. Now it's like all of our focus is on the performance of contemplation or joy. And it's really not possible for the body to be involved here because we're really just shining the light of our attention on the action itself and trying to satisfy this quality of like, okay, I have to do this joyfully. This is also a very countered way of the guide, right? Because we're not telling people how to feel. We want them to feel how they are authentically feeling, not creating a feeling for them to perform. All right. What about if we add some numbers in? So take a cup, wander for 5 minutes, bring back 5 things, or bring back 10 things.
It sets limits.
Yes, it sets limits. So yeah, once you have your 5 things,
then what?
Yeah, then what? First of all, it's a limit on the time constraint, so this doesn't feel infinite, but also maybe that 6th being would have been the real magic one, right? Anything else?
For me, it would create a feeling of I don't have enough time. So I'm not carefully choosing my things. I'm rushed. So I'm just going to grab 10 things.
Right. Yeah. So this rushes us. Yeah. Kat, did you have something you wanted to say?
I put it in the chat, but
Oh, okay.
now I'm worried I brought the wrong size cup. Can my cup or my hands fit that many things? I don't know.
Yes. Julia.
Yeah, there's quotas. I would begin to worry. I would want to watch I'd wish I had a watch. It would take me out of the place.
Right. So I think another way of describing this is that it feels like a homework assignment, right? Yeah, and Brooks, a sense of competition would kick in, right? Oh, who's going to get it the fastest? So this is really just a note on kind of the infinite quality that we're not going to give people kind of a outside of time, which is a necessary constraint. We're not giving people kind of these numbers to fulfill, these quotas, because then it becomes about basically winning the game. We've created a finite game, right? Okay, the game is to get 10 things. Go. You're like, ah. And lastly, okay, so what about if we add, let's call these abstract beings. Let's just say that these are beings, but that they are beings we can only interact with through the projection of our minds. They are not beings that we can smell or taste or touch. Take a cup, wander for 5 minutes, bring back gratitude, bring back wisdom, bring back healing. How would this alter your experience?
Those vary from person to person.
Definitely, yes, those vary.
I feel like with those words, the whole time I'd be searching for this like greater thing to happen and to have this like epiphany. And I feel like I'd waste all my time looking for this thing.
Right. You're in your head.
Yeah, I was gonna say it makes it like more of like a Freudian thing where you have to be, or like being interpretive, and like, are people gonna think that you're like being thoughtful and like smart about it?
Right. Yeah, then I have to come up with the symbolism of how the acorn is healing. Right. Then I have to have a really good story. Generally, things where people feel pressure to have a good story are not so simple. Yeah, it's no longer simple, nor is it open. Yeah, it's definitely not simple. I mean, hey, go take the next 15 minutes and find healing. It's like, what? How do I do that? Like, if the reaction from your participants upon receiving the invitation is, how do I do that? What are you talking about? It's probably not so simple, right? And yeah, it's way outside of the way of the guide, because this instantly illuminates that the guide has an agenda, that we want you to have a certain kind of emotional, cognitive, spiritual, psychological experience. We're trying to get you somewhere. We're not trying to get anyone anywhere. We're just trying to get them into their bodies. And then the forest is the therapist. The guide opens the doors, right? All right. So, forest therapy is an embodiment practice. We're supporting people in orienting their attention away from their minds and towards their embodied experience. We're not orienting people towards the analysis of their experience. That does not mean that analysis won't happen. And it's not a problem for people to analyze their own experience in whatever way they're going to do it. It just arises naturally. And we trust that any analysis is organically coming through the relationship between the participant and the more than human world. So you can take a perfectly good invitation and it can become prescriptive by adding something about the analysis of the experience. So here are 3 examples. Wander out and smell the flowers. Okay, perfect invitation, great. Wander out and smell the flowers. Notice if they remind you of anyone. So now people aren't even smelling the flowers. When we give people these kind of analytical additions to the invitation, they never really experience the first part of it, because we reflexively jump to the analysis without ever having the experience, because we're up in our heads. We're trying to figure out the answer to the second question. Well, actually, there's only one question. Wander out and smell the flowers is just an invitation, saying, here is something to do. But by adding, notice if they remind you of anyone, now it's something to do, and this is where I want you to take it. If you just were to have said, wander out and smell the flowers, oftentimes someone will come back and say, yeah, I was smelling these roses and they just really reminded me of my mom. Because I remember when I was a kid, she loved her garden and she would really tend to these roses, like really lovingly, da-da-da. Oh, I smelled this daffodil and it reminded me of my grandma because she would, give me daffodils for my birthday, whatever it is. We don't need to make people think of these types of associations. They just happen. Wander out and lean against the trees. Perfect. Notice how they make you feel. Now, feel is a very tricky word because technically speaking, we could say that this is an embodiment word, but that's not how people hear that word 99% of the time. Notice how they make you feel is an analysis of the experience that is more often than not an emotional analysis. So wander out and lean against the trees. This is an embodiment feeling. Okay, what does it feel like to lean against the trees? Now I'm noticing what I'm noticing. So now I'm analyzing it. Sometimes new guides will do this kind of strange thing about, adding the tag of notice what you're noticing. It's kind of meta. Notice what you're noticing. Basically, think about what you're experiencing. So instead of being in the primary sense experience, now we've created a layer of analysis on top of it. Wander out and gaze at the clouds. Do any of them have any meaningful shapes for you? Trust me, if people are going to look at the clouds, they're going to do this all by themselves. It's just going to arise. But if we tell them to do it, they're not actually going to see the clouds. This is a very funny phenomenon with human beings, that if you give them an analytical question, it activates the mind in such a way that the sensory apparatus dulls. So we're not having a very strong, direct primary sense experience of reality, because the thing at the top, at the front of consciousness, is what do they mean? What do these shapes mean to me? So when you're crafting your invitations, what we're doing is focusing on creating opportunities for direct experience without the analysis and allowing individuals to spontaneously and organically create that analysis. And that's okay. It happens all the time on forest therapy walks. This is part of trusting the participants, right? It's like, oh, well, if I kind of nudge them a little bit this way, maybe they'll get somewhere cool. They're going to get somewhere cool. And if you allow them to do it in their own way, each of them is going to get somewhere uniquely cool, which is what we want. Okay, so in this course, you'll hear this word prescription a lot. And it's really important to understand the difference between prescription and description. So oftentimes new guides get really kind of caught up in this feeling like, okay, I'm not allowed to prescribe anything. So the only invitation I feel like I can give is go sit somewhere and do nothing and just pay attention. Because everything else feels like I'm telling people what to do. Like coming back to these examples, if I tell them wander out and smell the flowers, I'm telling them what to do. And that's prescriptive. No, that is descriptive. When we say don't be prescriptive, what we're saying is that the invitation should not have any emotional, psychological, spiritual, imaginal, or social objective. You shouldn't be inviting people to think or feel a certain way, or that a certain thing is true, or to behave in a particular kind of way. Describing something is just part of the territory of crafting invitations, because the only thing that makes it different from the only thing that makes an invitation different from an exercise is the fact that you don't have to do it and you can modify it in whatever way you want. If you kind of can understand that, then an invitation is a sensory exercise, and we as guides are going to tell people what to do. And in a way, this is really something that the guide is an expert in a way that the average person has forgotten how to do. It's not like someone couldn't think about giving the beach a massage. It's just that that's not really where when they look at the sand, their initial reaction is not, oh, I wonder what it would feel like to massage the sand with my entire body. They just don't think about that. They don't think about, how many sounds can I make by splashing around in the water? These are not obvious thoughts for people. So as guides, we're giving people things to do. And when we give people things to do, we are describing the action. We're describing the activity or the process. And then it's an invitation only because that process is not compulsory and can be modified. One of my colleagues has this thing about, when you are taught creative writing in your early childhood education, your teacher will often say to you, be really descriptive so that the reader can step into the world you are creating. Now, with forest therapy, we don't want the participants to step into our world. We want to provide a loose scaffolding with which they can step into their own story. So we don't want to be overly descriptive, but we also need to give them enough to understand what we are inviting them to do. And basically anything that you can do with your body is on the table. Sometimes guides have a little bit of a feeling like, oh, I can only make invitations that are basically like, smell things, touch things, look at things, listen. Anything you can do with your body, this is all within the realm of embodiment. So circling trees, drawing in the sand, jumping over stones, crawling into the roots, spinning until you get dizzy, whatever it is, right? Think about all the different things you can do with your body. All of that can be translated into an invitation by just pairing it with the partnership piece, just getting people to do something with a being that involves their body and not their minds. So guides sometimes need to describe how participants might choose to deepen into their embodied relationships. This is just providing kind of scaffolding or a set of examples. So let's look at a few a few examples. Gather some rocks and, using your fingers, wash them clean, noticing how their appearance changes and how they feel against your skin. You might even offer these stone beings water from your mouth or your water bottle. After you've washed a few, find a way that they might want to be arranged and gaze upon them for a while. This is an example of a far more descriptive invitation, right? This is a lot more descriptive than wander out and smell the flowers, right? That is very lean. Not a lot of description there, not a lot of process. And that is fine. That's a great invitation. In this example, we're giving people more of a process, more things to do. Second invitation, wander out to where the ocean, sky, and sand meet. Begin by standing at the point where these beings meet and feel them against your skin. Slowly lower your body to your knees, perhaps all the way to your chest or back, and simply feel your body at this place where these elements meet. Wander out and greet the trees in this place with your body. There are hundreds of ways we might do this: holding hands with a branch, with a bow, a hug, a song, or a whisper, or a high five. Perhaps simply offering the tree your full attention can be enough to greet these beings. You might spend the whole time with one tree or wander around and greet many. So first, do any of these invitations tell people how to feel, how to think, or how to perceive reality? I don't think so. Does anyone think they do? I can't see very many people, so if you think that they do, I need you to unmute. Okay, I'll assume the answer is no. Are these invitations more descriptive than the ones from the previous slides? Yes. They offer more choices and more directive actions for participants to explore. So these are not prescriptive, these are more descriptive. You could also perhaps use the word directive, that these invitations tell people what to do in a more kind of granular way than wander out and smell the flowers. So here's where there's some liberation for guides. You can be descriptive or directive in what you are telling participants to do with their bodies. You're not going to be telling them how to feel emotionally, how to think, or how to perceive reality. You're telling people what to do with their bodies. And I think it's important to note that the more descriptive your invitation becomes, the edgier it will be. I think all three of these invitations have a fair amount of edginess. The first one, people get a little bit edgy about spitting water or just saliva onto the rocks. It's like a little weird for people. In the second one, maybe just this thing about putting your body all the way to the ground and having the waves crash over you. It's a little edgy. And then, yeah, a lot of people say, you know, I don't know if it's, you know, like if we weren't all hugging trees, I don't think I would feel confident enough to hug a tree in plain sight of other people. As you create more descriptive invitations, it naturally bends towards a greater degree of edginess, just because you've given people more of a kind of a tighter frame of how to do this. Now, one technique that is illustrated in that third example, which is nice, I think, is giving people a range of examples of how you could do this. So I'll say, you know, this is called greeting trees. Wander out and greet the trees with your body. There are hundreds, maybe 10,000 ways you can do this. It might look like holding hands, with a bow, with a hug, with a high five. And then you can say something like, I trust that you will find a way that feels right for you. And you notice I also included this thing about perhaps simply offering the tree your full attention can be enough to greet them. So I've given people essentially a range of options that represent like a scale of edginess. I know that the attention thing is at the lowest end of edginess. Just look at the trees. Probably not so edgy for people. Then you get all the way up to, I'm not sure what I'd put on top. Bowing or hugging would probably go on top. So you're creating a range of possibilities and then encouraging people to not just pick from those options, but to say, these illuminate some of the options. Go find a way that feels right to you. Elizabeth.
Hey, so can I ask, like, edges at like first glance, I would assume take us out of like a somatic place and put us more into like a thinking place, but I'm guessing that's not the case. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about that as you're talking. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, this thing of the somatic state, we can also describe that as liminality. So edges do tend to pop you out of liminality, but you remember in Tam's presentation, they had this thing about the skateboard and the dropping in and the popping out. One of my metaphors for liminality is it's like snorkeling or like swimming, where you can't be in there all the time. You're going to drown. So you need to come up and get some air, and then you come back down. The sequence of invitations that are scaffolded by these sharing circles effectively guarantee that structure to a certain extent. But during an invitation, people are naturally going to come in and out of liminality, and it's not our job to kind of keep them forcibly in liminality. I think when people encounter an edge, what they're experiencing is the somatic reality of a nervous system response. So, example, if we go out and you see a rattlesnake, you're going to get right into fight or flight. And that's going to activate the brain. All of a sudden, I mean, the autonomic nervous system is definitely part of the body, but it also is going to activate a certain system of thought about like, oh, wow, that's a snake. I'm not thinking about the invitation. I'm thinking about keeping myself safe. Now you're going to down-regulate in your own time, in your own way, and then something really cool could happen. So edges are not bad. Edges are going to inevitably happen for everyone. And part of the practice is really just trusting that people will self-regulate back into a state of somatic rest. It just kind of happens because nature is built for us to be calmed down by. It's actually not so hard when we are in nature to come back to that state. I think it's really hard when we're at home and we're living in our stress lives and we're being triggered into a stress response, but our environments are not built to soothe our nervous systems. So one of the really cool things about the way edges work within the context of forest therapy or any outdoor modality is that the environment is designed to calm you down. So to answer your question, yeah, edges are going to probably trigger some popping out of that liminal state, but that's not a problem. That's just part of basically being alive, being nature. It's interesting because according to some authors, only domesticated animals and human beings experience trauma because wild animals have an instantaneous way of processing threat and danger and coming back into the regulation of their nervous system in a healthy way. Essentially, trauma is your body storing stuff that your nervous system hasn't processed, and then it just triggers and resurfaces in a cycle, right? So essentially, we're practicing the thing that wild animals are practicing. We're practicing getting a little bit triggered into that autonomic nervous response and then down-regulating and coming back to somatic rest. It's kind of neat. Does that answer your question? I feel like I just went on a little bit of a ramble.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think I was kind of assuming the goal of liminality is to like keep them there.
No.
And so it was helpful because that's, I mean, yeah, it's natural to like pop in and pop out and so, or pop out and go back in. So thank you.
Yes. That's a really important thing to understand for the guides. It's not our job to get people into liminality, and it's not our job to keep them there. It's only our job to open the door. That's the realm of possibility, and you can't push people through the door, and you can't close the door behind them once they're in there. It's just this total acceptance of you are in control of your experience. You're going to drop in to the extent you feel comfortable, and that might be never, and that's okay. I always like to remind myself at the end of a walk, if I felt like it was just horrible, and like nobody was dropped in, and nobody was in liminality, I say, well, Ben, you did get a bunch of people to be outside for 3 hours. And that all by itself is a massive victory. And being out here is healthy for them. And that's good enough. Like, there's nothing I can do to push you in. Sue.
Yes. So I was a little concerned by just the previous 3 examples. So having been a teacher for many years, it seemed to be me, since they're taking all the information in orally, just through auditorily, that there were a lot of steps. And I wasn't sure how that would sit with people, like, first I do this, then I do this, and then I forgot, you know? So I was a little concerned about the multiple steps and the complexity of them.
So one response to this is that you will choose how you want to guide. And there is no hierarchy of invitations where some are really good and some are bad. I think of it as a binary scale. There are invitations and not invitations. Not invitations are prescriptive. So as long as you're not being prescriptive, you're on the side of invitations. And some guides like to have very clean, lean, simple, one-line invitations, and that's great. And some guides like to have a more descriptive process, and that's great. Now, one thing you may notice about the way I guide, whenever I offer an invitation before I send people out, I say, are there any questions before we get started? And so if I've said the thing and people are confused, they'll say, wait, so what are we doing? And I can just say it again. Another answer to this is that I might give you a multi-step process. Let's say it's 3 steps. You know, go find where the water and the land meet. Feel it on your feet, come down to knees, come down to back or chest. Just feel what it's like to be there. Now, I know that oftentimes when people receive this kind of invitation, they do forget at least half of it, but they retain enough of it to get them into a certain experience that they will then self-facilitate. And that's okay. One of the things about this is we don't have an expectation that people do the invitation. I think I had a really wonderful moment with Tam many years ago when Tam was becoming a trainer, and I said, you know, the point is not to get them to do the invitation. The point is to give them a radical sense of freedom that they can do what they feel like doing. And so it's not really a problem if people forget. It's just enough to get them in, and then they're just going to do whatever they want to do. Also, this only works if they really trust that you don't have a lot of hangups about them doing the invitation. If your attitude kind of gives permission for people to just do what they want to do, they'll kind of create their own invitation. This is a little bit coyote. This is like, oh, I'm giving you too much for you to remember. Let's see what you can do. Oh, you're doing something different. That's awesome. Tam, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I want to shout out to another trainer on our team, Rana, about who says, like, you know, great invitation is one that's just immediately forgotten. But, you know, just extending what Ben's saying, like, you know, like, what is the point of what we're doing? It's like, we're getting people outside, we're offering them an invitation for some tech detox, you know, but even that's an invitation, you know, but this is an opportunity to put our phones away if we want to, if we're unhappy looking at our phones 1,000 times a day. This is like a radical moment of let's actually look at trees and each other and be in the physical experience of aliveness, as opposed to ruminating in our brains and taking in all this information. And so, you know, this idea of giving really simple, open, sensory, infinite invitations is hopefully to just give people freedom to just go be, you know, without having to do anything or accomplish anything. It doesn't matter what they saw in the clouds when you invited them to gaze at the clouds. The point is the experience of just being in, and in the best, maybe the best case scenario is they forgot all about gazing at clouds the minute they walked off. And maybe instead what happened was like a butterfly flew by and they were like, oh, butterfly. And they followed the butterfly and then they smelled some flower. And that smell reminded them of maybe their grandmother. And then they had this wave of grief and then they started sobbing. And then all of a sudden they're, I don't know, sitting down on the ground and like digging around in the grass and just feeling the grass. And then you hear the guide like howling you back to the circle and you're like, huh? Where for a moment I forgot where I was. I wasn't thinking about what happened this morning or what I'm about to do or what day it is. That's liminality. Like I've just got, I call it myself, like I went through a portal. I say it all the time. Like sometimes my partners ask me a question. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I was in a portal. Could you repeat that? And that's what I call it. And but then you come back to the circle and how great it is. What a gift that the prompt is not, what did you see when you gazed at the clouds? Because you're like, oh no, I didn't do that. But we say, what are you noticing? And then there's room to say any of that experience, none of that experience, or like something that's happening right now. And so we're just trying to give that freedom to just be without anything needing to happen. We're not researchers. We're not collecting saliva samples. We're not trying to prove that people are chill or that this is healthy for you. We're just offering like radical freedom of just nothingness, just being.
There's some famous artist who said, it doesn't matter what you look at, it matters what you see. I like that one. Okay, Juju, the coyote. So coyote medicine or coyote wisdom, these terms come from many different indigenous spaces, Turtle Island. Typically, coyote in many mythologies is the trickster. And sometimes you may hear this in the context of coyote mentoring, where essentially your mentoring strategy is to never help the person answer the question, but essentially just give the question back to them. And then our friend Wile E. Coyote is kind of a cartoon embodiment of coyote wisdom, because coyote is such a trickster that he tricks other people into having revelation, but he also tricks himself into his own destruction. So he's kind of a crazy wisdom figure, and that's a side of indigenous mythology and spirituality that isn't really very present in the West. In the East, there's some trickster gods and crazy wisdom characters, but that's a conversation for another day. Rachel.
I was just wondering, so I was gonna ask Ben, if you, after your invitation, you always say, do you have any questions? And you already answered that. And then I was thinking, when you send people out, you're like, okay, so here's the invitation. And when you get back, we're gonna share about it. Like, is that
I don't say that.
Okay, good. No,
Yeah, no.
I've never heard you say it, but I was like, oh my gosh, like people will catch on to like the sequence of like what we're doing. But to be like, have it in my head that we're gonna have to share about what I experienced when I come back. I didn't know if that was part of the invitation or if.
This is partially why when I introduce gathering for the first time, I like to say sharing is invitational also. So you don't have to share about anything, but it's an invitation. If you would like to share what you're noticing, then that's what we're here to do. We're going to create some space for that, but it's not compulsory. You don't have to share. All right. Okay, so catching invitations. This is really where this concept of working in partnership with the forest becomes really important. And it really stems from just listening and noticing. What is the forest inviting me to do? instead of approaching it as a experience for other people, I find that if I'm going to develop an invitation, it begins with this question. What is the forest inviting me to do? How is the forest wanting to interact with me? Is it play? Is there any being that's calling my attention? So all these invitations I designed kind of spontaneously and then refined them over time. But just as an example, this one with the stones, I sent people out. This was in the high desert. So I sent people out to do what's in motion, and then kind of sat down and looked around. Oh, wow, there's all these stones. And I just picked one up, and I started noticing that as I was touching it, all this kind of sand and dirt was just coming off it. And then, oh, as I'm getting the dirt off, it's kind of like looking really different. And then I got a little curious about it. Like, oh, I wonder maybe if I get it wet, like it'll change colors. And yeah, I don't know if any of you have done this kind of thing, but the change in color was really drastic, really cool. And then basically I just washed a few of them and then said, oh, now I have these stones. Oh, okay, well, I'm gonna put them back to the earth, maybe just like arrange them. So it just kind of comes out of a play process. It's not that I started with this kind of like top-down idea of like, well, rocks will be cool if we get them wet. Like, how do I get people to get there? You have to engineer these, or at least this is my process. I always engineer these from the bottom up. It's not about like where I'm trying to get to. It's just starting with these simple interactions. So I have these rocks. What can I do with these rocks? I tried doing some invitations where you kind of like bury yourself in rocks. Same thing. It's like I was laying on the desert floor, and I think first I put one on my forehead, and then like on my heart and on my stomach, and then I started putting them on my shoulders, like on my legs. And then I had a partner do this with me. I was like, oh, maybe we can bury each other in rocks. And it's just this play. It's not coming at it from a perspective of like, okay, I need to come up with an invitation. It starts with this relationship between yourself and the beings, and then engineering or designing it around that experience. So starting very simply, I think the invitation kind of starts with what I think of as a seed. This is not in the curriculum. This is just how I think about it. So I think of the seed as really the most simple way of describing the interaction between my body and the body of another being. So some examples might include gazing at clouds, tracing tree branches with my finger, balancing on stones, smelling flowers, tickling my face with grass, right? This is like the core, the essence. This is just how simple it can be. And these seeds are essentially an invitation already. You don't actually need to go any further than that. But now you can elaborate. So you might ask yourself some questions like, well, what senses are being used? And do I want to use one sense? Do I want to use two? Do I want to use all the senses? How big is the scope of this invitation? By that, I mean, is it an invitation to engage with the whole more than human world? Is it an invitation to engage with a kind of a type of being, like let's say trees? Is it an even smaller scope where it is this specific oak tree? So when I design an invitation, you can start with the seed, and then you can kind of play with opening or widening and narrowing this scope. Sometimes it's cool to do an invitation just with this one being. Like if there's a really awesome tree, just an enormous tree, okay, we're all going to do an invitation with this one tree. And then you can widen it out. Okay, now it's the same invitation, but you choose your tree. Or maybe you widen it out. Now it's the same invitation, but you can choose any being. Is this invitation done solo or collaboratively with other participants? So I just gave you an example of that with the burying myself in stones. So one variation is go find a place to lay down and place stones upon your body. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. A variation on that could be find a group of 2 or 3 or 4, have one person lay down, and the other people are going to, gently bury you in stones, and your job is just to feel the sensation of being buried in these stones. Okay, then you switch partners and whatever. So you can take that one invitation, do it 2 ways, right? You can do it as a solo experience, or you can do it as a collaborative experience. You can do that with almost any invitation. You can take something that you've designed for a solo experience and make it collaborative. And it's kind of a cool thing that the invitations where people work together in small groups can be really sweet. And especially if you're working in like a lot of my walks at the Arboretum, I'll get all couples. It's like everyone comes as a pair. And then to do an invitation where you're going to be working with a partner is really sweet because they got to spend some time with each other doing something. This can also work really well if you're doing something like a walk where everyone knows each other, like a birthday party or something like that. And like people get to have these more intimate experiences doing something with each other and in partnership with the more than human world. It can be fun. That being said, it can also be edgy for people. Sometimes that's a good edge. And then you might ask, what actions might bring a relational feel to this experience? These are not all the questions you can ask. These are just some. So to give you an example, this thing about massaging the beach. A massage is typically a thing you do with another human. It's an intimate process. It's the same thing with a hug, right? That example about hugging or bowing or holding hands or high-fiving. So these are all essentially actions we take with other people that signal a relationship or a sense of intimacy. So if you can think about the ways in which we interact with other humans in an embodied way to create relationship, you can use those same embodiment techniques and use them in partnership with the more than human world. So you can take just this little seed and then build it out into a more elaborate invitation. Now, this is kind of where the art of this really comes in, that you have to give them just enough, not too much and not nothing. Sometimes guides want to do an invitation like, wander out and notice everything with all your senses. This doesn't really work because the scope is infinite and it's overwhelming and people don't know how to do it. It's just like, I can't exert the mental effort to narrow in on something because everything is too much. So we need to give people enough of a frame or a scope that gives them some direction, but not so much that it becomes overbearing. And this is why, like I said at the beginning of the call, this stuff is kind of hard and it comes in time, and you probably won't be a master at it by the end of this call. Tam already kind of covered this, but we have these circles in between the invitations, and we only use these 2 prompts. Just echoing, what are you noticing? We use this very intentionally instead of, what did you notice about smelling the flowers? What did you notice about touching the trees? Because it presumes that people have actually done the invitation, which then signals to everyone that you have an expectation that they always do the invitation. So keeping it at just what are you noticing allows people to essentially do whatever they feel like doing and still be included in that circle. They can still speak to the prompt. I did a lot of training in this way of counsel. And one of the things they always tell us is, you have to come up with a prompt that everyone can speak to, or it doesn't work. They'll train you where they'll say, for example, if you have a group of strangers and you say, tell me a story about a time you went on vacation in a foreign country. Okay, now maybe not everyone can talk to that. Maybe not even everyone can talk to, tell me a story about a time you went on vacation. But everyone can probably tell you a story about, tell me about a time you rested. tell me about a time you took a break from working. Okay, now we all have a story to tell. We've created a space where everyone has access to share from their personal experience. What are you noticing does that every single time? Now, as a trainer giving you my tips and tricks, I will tell you that I like to scaffold this a little bit where after pop, I'll say, what are you noticing? This might be something you're noticing in the world around you, at the level of the mind, at the level of the heart. There are no wrong answers. And this essentially liberates people from this weird phenomenon where if the first person that shares says something about their emotional experience, let's say, I'm noticing I feel an enormous sense of joy. And then the next person freaks out because they're like, oh, I thought we were talking about like what we're noticing like around us, like our sensory experience. And then they'll feel like, uh-oh, I have to say something about my emotional inner experience. And so you've basically just preemptively avoided that problem by creating a sense of welcoming all shares. And then after what's in motion, I'll say, you know, again, what are you noticing? You might ask, Ben, do you mean what am I noticing right now? Or what did I notice while I was doing that invitation? And I'll say, you know, the amazing thing about experiencing a memory is that it can only happen here and now. Memories occur in the eternal present. And so then that gives people permission to share either what am I noticing right now or what did I notice, because it's all happening here and now. So there's some ways that you can kind of scaffold that prompt to give a deeper level of support, but essentially we're encouraging you not to use prompts that are specifically geared to the invitation because it signals to everyone that you have a very tightly held expectation that they actually do every invitation. And that there's a little bit of like, you know, if you don't do the invitation, we're all gonna know. At tea ceremony or your threshold of incorporation, what would you like to share to make this experience feel complete for you today? This is, I think I mentioned this on our last call, this is the analysis moment. This is the moment where we're bringing people out of liminality and we're saying, okay, now analyze your experience. What do you want to take away? What do you want to incorporate? Because what is shared as a response to this question is what people will remember. There's this thing about verbalizing your inner experience that actually makes it real. Because up until you actually share it with people who hear you say it, you can always kind of question yourself and say, I don't know, was that a dream? Was that real? Did that really happen? It seems kind of strange. I don't know, maybe it didn't, maybe I just made it up. By verbalizing it, it's almost like making a commitment to bringing it into reality because it's been witnessed by a human community. Say, you know, this is what I want to share to feel complete. It's the metaphorical taste in your mouth as you walk away. And, you know, it's fairly predictable that most people, what they want to share at the end is some form of gratitude and often some form of resolution for their lives. You'll hear a lot of people say, you know, I need to be outside more. I need to slow down more. I need to remember that this is always here for me. These types of things, this is kind of where we bring people back into an analysis of their experience, because that's the harvesting, that's the incorporation. And this is all part of language of invitation, because we're not telling people what to think or what to feel. We're just creating this space. Maya Angelou has some of the best quotes ever. And one is, people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So don't stress out about all this too much. Sometimes guides get really like kind of agitated about like, oh, I have to say everything perfectly. or I'm going to ruin the experience. And that is not true. The thing that makes the whole experience work is the way of the guide. It's this feeling of like, wow, Ben made me feel so welcome and so unjudged and so liberated from needing to be good at this. That's what I'll remember. I'm not going to remember what Ben said or what he did. I'm going to remember that feeling. Your energy creates this container. It's not the words. This isn't like magic with words. This is magic with the heart. It's about being kind of in a space of absolute calm, that nothing goes wrong here. We're going to be totally fine. When you're experiencing a lot of stress, everyone else is going to start feeling that stress too. So really, seriously, don't stress out about making your language of invitation perfect. Just really consider and refine over time. You'll know when you say something that doesn't quite work. You know, it'll be like instantly obvious. People will go out to the invitation. You'll say, oh, that didn't quite come out the way that I could have done it. Like it could be refined, and you'll refine your language of invitation over time. You're not going to be perfect at it when you do your first practice walk. That's okay. It's just this long journey. To close, I'd like to give you one more quote from Nietzsche. It says, "Your body has more wisdom than your deepest philosophy." We tend to think about blowing people's minds, but the philosophy isn't going to blow their mind. Feeling the wisdom of their body, that's where it's at. That's really what we're giving people space to do. So maybe we can have a final round of sharing, just popcorn. Anyone who wants to share, we don't need to go in a circle. Oh, okay. Do I have questions in chat, Tam, or have you already answered all these?
Just Heidi asked if you could, you said something about with the sharing, verbalizing is a commitment to ... and
Yeah. I mean, you can
remember
watch the recording. I can try to paraphrase. Like, verbalizing your inner experience makes it real because it's witnessed by other people. And when it is witnessed by other people, you become accountable to that reality. You become accountable to that statement. You can't take it back, right? So, any final shares? What would you like to share to feel complete? What are you noticing about language of invitation? Questions, curiosities, revelations, it's all welcome here.
Question.
Shoot.
My question is about when you're giving one of the longer invitations, you know, like taking the stone and washing the stone and all of that. Are you giving it and then letting them go? Or are you close by and continuing, you know, to give more information?
Oh no, I'm gone.
You're gone.
I'm doing the invitation. I'm just like in my own process. Now, another piece of this is that sometimes you make this wonderful invitation, but it's just too much, and you make what's called a multi-stage invitation. This is going to get covered later in the course, but to give you an example with the rocks, I could break this into two invitations or two kind of sub-invitations. First part, I could say, wander out and collect some stones that are calling your attention. Doesn't matter how many. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Call them back in 10 minutes. Now I'm going to give you part two. Find a place to sit and begin by just washing them with your hands. And then perhaps you want to add some water, either from your mouth or your water bottle, and then arrange them. So now I've just kind of broken that invitation into two parts, which makes it a little bit easier to, like, you know, remember each piece because there's less going on. But yeah, I just, when I send people out, it's like I'm gone. I'm not watching you. I'm not going to like, I'm not going to know what you're doing. And that's part of the point, is that you're removing kind of the authoritarian gaze of the leader. That's what also creates this sense of freedom, that I'm not being watched. It's fun doing this work with like high schoolers because they're so used to that authoritarian gaze. They're so used to someone always watching them to make sure they're doing it right. And so when I guide, I often notice that they think they're being kind of subversive by not doing the invitation. They think they're being naughty. And then they start realizing that I don't care. Like, I don't mind if you don't do the invitation. Like, it looks like you're having a lot of fun. And then they're like, oh, wow, he's really serious. Like, he doesn't need us to perform this. Like, he was really serious when he said that we can do whatever we want. So yeah, for me, it's the same thing for me when I do sharing. When I break the whole group into smaller groups, I'll say, find a partner or a group of 3 or 4 and just share what you're noticing with each other. And we'll do this for 5 minutes. I like to actually walk completely away from the group. I like to just take a little walk. I don't want them to feel like I'm listening in on them, because then that influences kind of the way that they're going to share. It's like when you were in school, right? And you're sharing in small groups, and then the teacher shows up, and then you're like, oh, I have to share something really good. Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
Wonderful. All right. Catherine, and then we'll hit Lynn's questions in the chat.
I just want to say that the more I get into this course, the more I realize that less is more, and silence is golden.
Yes. It's really a funny thing where, like, especially for me, I have found in my career as a guide, I'm constantly getting more and more simple and more kind of confident in the simplicity, that it's just like, wow. People aren't, I think Charlie Chaplin said, simplicity is not such a simple thing. People have a really hard time just being here, just smelling flowers and looking at clouds. It's like, they're like, wow, you're really good at this. I'm like, thanks. Like, this is called just like being here. They're like, I don't know, like, you seem like you're really practiced at this. Like, you can be too. Just smell the flowers and look at the clouds and touch the trees. Like, it becomes more reflexive. After you take this course, you start noticing how other people relate to nature, and no judgment, whatever, it's all good. But it's funny because you'll see that people don't notice very much. Like, they don't, like I was telling you, these questions do not occur to them of like, I wonder what happens if I just gently touch the surface of the stream with my hand. What will that feel like? I wonder what will happen if I listen, if I put my ear against a tree. These questions just don't occur to people. It's really kind of a funny thing. And then they start doing it, and there's all of these sensory experiences that are like really deep. Yeah, Julia, people are often very busy in nature. Yeah, we don't have time to slow down and like smell the flowers. No. Okay, Lynn. Missed the first 1/2. When will it be posted? You mean this call? It'll be posted tonight. And how many invitations after Pop and Whim? Great question. Part of this depends on time. Typically, if I'm guiding a 2-hour walk, I can usually fit 2 partnership invitations. And my flow is usually that I like to try to catch an invitation for the one after Whim. And then for the one after that, I usually do a works everywhere, anywhere invitation. Because I don't want to be stressed about finding another invitation. I've got tea ceremony coming up. I've got stuff to do, I'm just going to do something simple. It's like sit spot is great before tea ceremony. And sit spot is one with like this is an invitation with 1,000 faces. You can do sit spot plus almost anything. When I do the full moon walks, I'll do sit spot plus moon gazing. You know, find a place to sit and just gaze towards the eastern horizon as the moon comes up. Just orient your attention towards the sky, right? So you can take sit spot and then add just one little bit, and then it becomes its own unique invitation. But if I'm doing a 3-hour walk, I could probably do 3 invitations. I think at a certain point, it becomes a little bit overload. Like all of a sudden you're like, okay, like we've done this. Like I don't need to do 1,000,000 invitations. And again, it's that thing about less is more. Like I'd rather have really long, luxurious invitations with enough time to share, and then like a nice, chill, relaxing tea ceremony than trying to cram in like 5 or 6 invitations. But yeah, I think the big thing is about time. Yeah, how much time do you have?
Thank you for that. And I had one other question. This is Lynn. I'm finally here. And that the question I had was, when you send people up and say get together in a group, you know, find a few people, and you know, if you care to share what you're noticing, do you do anything to address the innate human anxiety of being asked to pair with people you don't know?
No.
Just let them figure it out.
Just let them figure it out. Yeah. Because I'm not, I mean, yeah, if people get into these groups and someone's like, I really don't want to share, then I assume that people will just be okay with that. It's not like someone else is going to make them, like, force them to share. It's just going to be like, all right, this is like a little awkward, but whatever. And that's okay. I don't like to call out edges. I don't like to project on people that like, oh, this might be edgy.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. It's like,
yeah, that just reminds me of like the rock invitation. Like if someone's afraid of getting buried, they have their own personal way of, or they're their own selves. So if they don't want to be a part of it, they can say, I'm going to sit this one out.
Right. Yeah. Or I'll help bury you, but I don't want to get buried.
Exactly.
Or they'll say, I don't want to be buried, but you can put one rock on my tummy or whatever. Like, yeah, people are going to kind of, in those group processes, they're going to navigate that as a little community. Yeah. Christy.
So if you were guiding a group that specifically had something in common, let's say you were doing forest therapy walks specifically for grieving groups or something like that, would you still shy away from addressing the topic, at least in the introductions and things like that? Or would you acknowledge sort of the commonality that brings people to the group and then leave it for the invitations?
What do you mean leave it for the invitations?
Like basically acknowledge it with the you know, the welcoming and all of that, and then with the invitations, just, you know, do your standard invitations that are non-specific to the commonality of the group.
Right. I mean, I generally don't do either. I definitely never design invitations as a projection of what I think people should or need to be experiencing. There was a woman that we trained a long time ago that had a really great reflection on this kind of this theme or this topic. And she said, you know, she had lost a child, and she was saying, it's crazy because, you know, sometimes I need to cry, sometimes I need to laugh, sometimes I need to dance, sometimes I need to lay on the ground. It just differs day to day. Like my grieving process is so, it covers such a massive expanse of emotional and psychological experiences that, like, if you were going to design an experience for me, chances are it probably wouldn't be what I needed in that moment. But if you give me the ability to express my grief in its own unique way, I will find a way to do that within this container of freedom. So yeah, I never like change what I'm doing, or, you know, like, oh, I'm like, these people are all grieving, so I'm going to get them to like, yeah, I don't know, like work with water because water is healing, or I'm going to get them to work with trees because they're grounded, whatever. It's like, it's about what's showing up in that moment. And everything is based in the context of that moment. Like what beings are here that are being called into, like, into relationship here, and then trusting that those beings are going to operate in such a way that it's going to be helpful for people. Maybe, and maybe not. But I'm not going to
And the
try
reason I ask is that I've seen forest therapy or forest bathing advertised with target groups. And that was my question, was how is it different?
Yes. Okay. So you might want to do a walk that is kind of, yeah, for a certain kind of demographic. It's like grieving. I've seen people do like mommy and me. I've seen people do like, you know, youth or older folks, whatever. That can create like a strong field for people, because they feel like people here all understand my experience on some level. And so it can create a deeper sense of intimacy within the group, and that can strengthen their collective process. It's still the same forest therapy. The practice is still the same, but the psychodynamics of the group are going to be very different because of that shared experience.
I want to chime in and say this question comes up, or a question along this line that comes up often is, I'm guiding a group of this demographic or this intersectional group, this affinity group. What are good invitations for this group? And the answer is same invitations that we would give for any group. And of course, that's different. Like, say you're running a retreat and you've got a grief group, like, yeah, maybe there's something relevant you're going to acknowledge in your introduction or something. But in terms of the invitations, gazing at clouds, that's just across the board. Like, that's sort of the whole point of forest therapy, is that it's like expansive enough to hopefully, you know, be inclusive of any group and anyone can find their way in. And if they're, you know, grieving or celebrating or whatever it is that they need to do during that time, that we've given them all that permission because it's invitational.
Thank you. Any last shares? We have a few minutes left. Any shares that aren't questions?
I was going to share sort of the last slide and the this idea of being perfect at it. I just hit about a year of leading yoga, and I can say from a very recent experience of that over that year, it takes a lot more time than I would like to feel like I'm actually getting good. And it also made me think of a podcast that I listened to recently that can sort of, it's relevant for anything, but I think for leading or guiding or teaching, about innate abilities and natural talent, like those are super impressive, of course, but there's also something almost more impressive about having to practice at something or work at something, like the growth and evolution that comes along with that. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Drop it in the WhatsApp group. Drop the link. Anyone else?
I sometimes think that the guiding is sort of heavy, but I just want to thank you, like the invitation you gave us with the cup. It was fun. It was so light. It was like just free to just kind of run around and play like a kid. So there's a lot of joy that pops up when we do this. So thank you.
Absolutely. I think this should be fun, and sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, but it's all welcome here. So you just never know what's going to come out of these walks. But yeah, that the experience has the possibility for fun. I think sometimes we get kind of like bogged down in let's call them healing modalities. We get bogged down in the idea that like this should be really serious. But that joy and fun are transformative and healing phenomenon within the realm of consciousness. Like we tend to like sometimes forget that. It's like, oh, no, this is supposed to be about healing. It's supposed to be serious. And sometimes the fun and the laughter and the joy is the most healing thing. So it's really about having that radical hospitality.
I mean, for me too, I just want to say like there's no should, which is what I find so freeing about this. And this is also a fundamental difference sort of between forest therapy and Shinden Yoku, like some of our inspirations where, you know, you should get outside because it's bad for your health to be inside. Like I'm not carrying that message. I'm carrying that knowing and that impact, and I'm motivated by that. But at the end of the day, like forest therapy, it's not that it should be deep. It should be healing. It should be light. It should be joyful. Like it's just here to be whatever you want it to be or need it to be or whatever it is for you in this moment. And that my job as a guide is to just sort of like get out of the way of letting that happen naturally in the moment.
I love that you just shared that, Tam. I've been telling my students something profound that someone said to me just a couple years ago was, what if there is no right and wrong and life is just about choices, and some choices we make the next ones come with more ease, and some choices we make, there's maybe some more difficulty, and then added to that, there are no oughts and shoulds. And so I've just been saying to them, what if there are no oughts and shoulds? Because people use those words a lot. You oughta, you should. And they kind of look at me like dumbfounded, like, really, that's a possibility? So thank you for sharing.
Last call. If your heart is pounding and you know you need to say something, this is the moment. Totoro. All right, Totoro's here. It must be time to finish. So thank you for your attention. Again, we're going to be working on this one a lot. So your first assignment within this module will be to be creating your first 3 invitations, and you will receive some feedback, assuming there is feedback to give. So yeah, just a reminder, please keep up as you can, and soon you will be guiding your first walk. I'm so excited. So excited to hear about your walks. Juju, will we get feedback on your pop? Only if something is like really needing feedback. If you got no feedback on pop, it means you're on the right track. Keep playing. All right, we can all unmute and growl or yip or hiss or however you describe honey badger sound. Yip, yip, yip.
That was great.
Bye, everybody.